21. He would have loved then and there to have left for the south, where he could learn the new techniques the old man had told him about. But that was of course out of the question. He was after all only an apprentice, which was to say, a nobody. Strictly speaking, as Baldini explained to him, this was after he had overcome his initial joy at Grenouille's resurrection. Strictly speaking, he was less than a nobody, since a proper apprentice needed to be of faultless, illegitimate birth, to have relatives of like standing, and to have a certificate of indenture, all of which he lacked. Should he, Baldini, nevertheless decide one day to help him obtain his journeyman's papers, that would happen only on the basis of Grenouille's uncommon talents, his faultless behavior from then on, and his, Baldini's, own infinite kindness, which, though it often had worked to his own disadvantage, he would forever be incapable of denying. To be sure, it was a good while before he fulfilled his promised kindness, just a little under 3 years. During that period, and with Grenouille's help, Baldini realized his high-flying dreams. He built his factory in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, succeeded in his scheme for exclusive perfumes at court, received a royal patent. His fine fragrances were sold as far off as St. Petersburg, as Palermo, as Copenhagen. A musk-impregnated item was much sought after even in Constantinople, where God knows they already had enough sense of their own. Baldini's perfumes could be smelled both in elegant offices in the city of London and at the court in Parma, both in the royal castle at Warsaw and in the little schloss of the Graf von Unzu-Lippe-Detmold. Having reconciled himself to living out his old age in bitterest poverty near Messina, Baldini was now at age 70 indisputably Europe's greatest perfumer and one of the richest citizens of Paris. Early in 1756, he had in the meantime acquired the adjoining building on the Pont au Change, using it solely as a residence, since the old building was literally stuffed full to the attic with scents and spices. He informed Grenouille that he was now willing to release him, but only on 3 conditions. First, he would not be allowed to produce in the future any of the perfumes now under Baldini's roof, nor sell their formulas to third parties. Second, he must leave Paris and not enter it again for as long as Baldini lived. And third, he was to keep the first 2 conditions absolutely secret. He was to swear to this by all the saints, by the poor soul of his mother, and on his own honor. Grenouille, who neither had any honor nor believed in any saints or in the poor soul of his mother, swore it. He would have sworn to anything. He would have accepted any condition Baldini might propose, because he wanted those silly journeyman's papers that would make it possible for him to live an inconspicuous life, to travel undisturbed, and to find a job. Everything else was unimportant to him. What kinds of conditions were those anyway? Not enter Paris again? What did he need Paris for? He knew it down to its last stinking cranny. He took it with him wherever he went. He had owned Paris for years now. Not produce any of Baldini's top-selling perfumes, not pass on their formulas, as if he could not invent 1,000 others, just as good and better, if and when he wanted to. But he didn't want to at all. He did not in the least intend to go into competition with Baldini or any other bourgeois perfumer. He was not out to make his fortune with his art. He didn't even want to live from it if he could find another way to make a living. He wanted to empty himself of his innermost being, of nothing less than his innermost being, which he considered more wonderful than anything else the world had to offer. And thus Baldini's conditions were no conditions at all for Grenouille. He set out in spring early one May morning. Baldini had given him a little rucksack, a second shirt, 2 pairs of stockings, a large sausage, a horse blanket, and 25 francs. That was far more than he was obligated to do, Baldini said, considering that Grenouille had not paid a sol in fees for the profound education he had received. He was obligated to pay 2 francs in severance, nothing more. But he could no more deny his own kindly nature than he could the deep sympathy for Jean-Baptiste that had accumulated in his heart over the years. He wished him good luck in his wanderings, and once more warned him emphatically not to forget his oath. With that, he accompanied him to the servants' entrance where he had once taken him in, and let him go. He did not give him his hand. His sympathy did not reach quite that far. He had never shaken hands with him. He had always avoided so much as touching him, out of some kind of sanctimonious loathing, as if there were some danger that he could be infected or contaminated. He merely said a brief adieu, and Grenouille nodded and ducked away and was gone. The street was empty. 22. Baldini watched him go, shuffling across the bridge to the island, small, bent, bearing his rucksack like a hunchback, looking from the rear like an old man. On the far side, where the street made a dogleg at the Palais de Parlement, he lost sight of him and felt extraordinarily relieved. He had never liked the fellow. He could finally admit it now. He had never felt comfortable the whole time he had housed him under his roof and plundered him. He felt much as would a man of spotless character who does some forbidden deed for the first time, who uses underhanded tricks when playing a game. True, the risk that people might catch up with him was small, and the prospects for success had been great. But even so, his nervousness and bad conscience were equally great. In fact, not a day had passed in all those years when he had not been haunted by the notion that in some way or other he would have to pay for having got involved with this man. If only it turns out all right. That had been his continual anxious prayer: if only I succeed in reaping the profits of this risky adventure without having to pay the piper. If only I succeed. What I'm doing is not right, but God will wink his eye. I'm sure he will. He has punished me hard enough many times in my life, without any cause, so that it would only be just if he would deal graciously with me this time. What wrong have I actually done, if there has been a wrong? At the worst, I am operating somewhat outside guild regulations by exploiting the wonderful gifts of an unskilled worker and passing off his talent as my own. At the worst, I have wandered a bit off the traditional path of guild virtue. At the very worst, I am doing today what I myself have condemned in the past. Is that a crime? Other people cheat their whole life long. I have only fudged a bit for a couple of years, and only because of purest chance I was given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Perhaps it wasn't chance at all, but God himself who sent this wizard into my house to make up for the days of humiliation by Pelissier and his cohorts. Perhaps divine providence was not directing himself at me at all, but against Pelissier. That's perfectly possible. How else would God have been able to punish Pelissier other than by raising me up? My luck in that case would be the means by which divine justice has achieved its end. And thus I not only ought to accept it, but I must, without shame and without the least regret. Such had often been Baldini's thoughts during those years. Mornings, when he would descend the narrow stairway to his shop. Evenings, when he would climb back up carrying the contents of the cash box to count the heavy gold and silver coins. And at night, when he lay next to the snoring bag of bones that was his wife, unable to sleep for fear of his good fortune. But now such sinister thoughts had come to an end. His uncanny guest was gone and would never return again, yet the riches remained and were secure far into the future. Baldini laid a hand to his chest and felt, beneath the cloth of his coat, that little book beside his beating heart. 600 formulas were recorded there, more than a whole generation of perfumers would ever be able to implement. If he were to lose everything today, he could, with just this wonderful little book, be a rich man once again within a year. Truly, he could not ask for more. From the gables of the houses across the way, the morning sun fell golden and warm on his face. Baldini was still looking to the south, down the street in the direction of the Palais de Parlement. It was simply too delightful not to see anything more of Grenouille. And washed over by a sense of gratitude, he decided to make that pilgrimage to Notre Dame today, to cast a gold coin in the alms box, to light 3 candles, and on his knees to thank his Lord for having heaped such good fortune on him, and having spared him from retribution. But then that same afternoon, just as he was about to head for the church, something absurd happened. A rumor surfaced that the English had declared war on France. That was of itself hardly disquieting. But since Baldini had planned to send a shipment of perfume to London that very day, he postponed his visit to Notre Dame and instead went into the city to make inquiries, and from there to go out to his factory in the Faubourg Saint-Antoine and cancel the shipment to London for the present. That night in bed, just before falling asleep, he had a brilliant idea. In light of the hostilities about to break out over the colonies in the New World, he would launch a perfume under the name of Prestige de Quebec, a heroic resinous scent, whose success, this much was certain, would more than repay him for the loss of business with England. With that sweet thought in his silly old head, relieved and bedded now on its pillow, beneath which the pressure of the little book of formulas was pleasantly palpable, Maitre Baldini fell asleep and awoke no more in this life. For that night a minor catastrophe occurred, which with appropriate delays resulted in a royal decree requiring that little by little all the buildings on all the bridges of Paris be torn down. For with no apparent reason, the west side of the Pont au Change, between the third and fourth piers, collapsed. 2 buildings were hurtled into the river so completely and suddenly that none of their occupants could be rescued. Fortunately, it was a matter of only 2 persons, to wit, Giuseppe Baldini and his wife Teresa. The servants had gone out, either with or without permission. Chenier, who first returned home in the small hours slightly drunk, or rather intended to return home, since there was no home left, suffered a nervous breakdown. He had sacrificed 30 long years of his life in hopes of being named heir in Baldini's will. For the old man had neither children nor relatives, and now at one blow the entire inheritance was gone. Everything, house, business, raw materials, laboratory, Baldini himself, indeed even the will, which perhaps might have offered him a chance of becoming owner of the factory. Nothing was found, not the bodies, not the safe, not the little books with their 600 formulas. Only one thing remained of Giuseppe Baldini, Europe's greatest perfumer. A very motley odor of musk, cinnamon, vinegar, lavender, and 1,000 other things that took several weeks to float high above the Seine from Paris to Le Havre.